to yet another edition of Simplified with me, Tanvi Shukla. Viewers, you must have seen this video that went viral a few weeks ago. Video of a youngster called Pratik Mehra who was actually running late in the night on the street. And one of these gentlemen who was driving by paused to speak to him, and this young man kept running. The conversation actually went viral. This man who was working at one of the retail outlets, fast food retail outlets, was actually running back home because this is the only time he got to train to join the armed forces. In fact, after this video went viral, there were several of those who decided to help him such that he trains right way to get inducted into the armed forces. Such is the love and such is the kind of enthusiasm that we see across many parts of our country, especially in rural areas where youngsters train in the hope of joining the armed forces someday. Today we are going to talk about that entire process. Today we are going to talk about the tour of duty, which is a new concept that the government and the defense ministry are looking at right now to bring in youngsters for a shorter period of time, to actually look at bringing in, inducting soldiers, officers and non-officers into our army for a period of 3 to 5 years. Now, what is the draft that the government is working on? Based on several media reports, and we've picked up the information that DNA actually reported, it says that soldiers and officers will be recruited for 3 to 5 years. Now, some media reports suggest that currently the government may only move ahead with the plan for soldiers, non-officer ranks, and later on also look at officer induction in a similar manner. So initially, just on an experiment basis, maybe they bring in 100 soldiers. Obviously, the plan is to ramp it up and gradually make this the induction model, where if you induct a few soldiers, 25% of them go on to serve for only 3 years. Another 25% of them go on to serve for only 5 years, and the rest of the will then continue to serve the entire stipulated time period in the Indian Army. Now remember, all of this is just based on media reports that we've picked up. The government is yet to finalize and sign off on anything official. This is still in the works and being contemplated. They're also saying that the soldiers who will be released at the end of 3 years or 5 years will get some additional benefits, at least for a fixed amount of time. So that acts as an incentive to say some kind of a medical benefit and also pension that may be in the offing. Now, this is what has been reported in the last week, 10 days across various media outlets and has become point of much conversation. Today we're going to break this down for you and really look at why this is happening, what could be the possible benefits. Now let me actually just put it out straight. Between all the conversations that I've had so far and all that I've read so far, there are different pros and cons that are being presented. For example, what could be the benefits? Well, we could look at the fact that this really saves the government and the Indian Army a huge amount of money. The salary cost and the pension cost is a big chunk of the expenditure for the government, and if you look at bringing in soldiers only for a short time, maybe you will save money on that front. The other argument obviously is that you bring in soldiers in their prime age when they are young, use them then, and then thereafter they can go on to have a government job or even a private job out of the Indian forces. They also say that there is a larger idea of reducing the personnel strength in the Indian Army, and this could perhaps be a step closer to that. On the other side, those who argue against this say that we should instead focus on fewer people but better skilled soldiers. So you bring in fewer soldiers, but you train them better, you focus on quality, then on quantity. They also say that there is actually no shortage of Indians really who are seeking to join the army, unlike the United States, where draft is actually mandatory if you've been drafted, because there isn't so much interest amongst youngsters. In India, though, there is still decent amount of interest which is there, maybe out of love for serving for your country, or also because it's a good job avenue, a good job opportunity that many see it as. So obviously there are two sides to this. The other aspect is that they say that if you bring somebody into the army, you train them to be in the army, once they're out of the army, what are they going to do for the rest of their life? What career options will they then have, having missed out on the initial years when they were in the armed forces? These being the arguments, let's look at what it is that we are trying to understand here. Question number one is, what are really the benefits that a tour of duty can really provide to people in our country, to the army of our country as well? So both sides we're going to look at. We will also talk about, will this scheme, the Agnipath scheme or the Agniveer induction scheme, as many are calling it, actually help fix the problem of shortage of soldiers that we are currently facing? Can combat soldiers really be those who are inducted only for 3 years? How much of training will they really manage to have to be right there at the forefront as part of combat in any conflict? We're also going to ask, how else, if not this way, how else do we look at reducing the high personnel cost, which sometimes does become a concern for any sitting government? And does the Indian Army really need such a large number of soldiers? Do we reduce that, focus more on technology, or can it really not be a compromise between the two? That being said, let me say hello and welcome to the special guest who's joining us, whose expertise we are looking to get here, Major General BS Dhanoa, retired Army General, who's joining me right now. He last served at the Army War College, where his primary role was mentoring and educating the future military leaders of the armed forces. So he's the correct person to have for this conversation. He's also written much about it and expressed many of his views on this earlier. He's commanded an armored brigade earlier and an infantry division on the western borders. Thank you, General Dhanoa, for joining me here on Simplified. Let me begin by asking you, what are the benefits and even the disadvantages of this concept?
Okay, so you put across quite a few interesting and important questions in your opening statements. And I think the questions do focus on the right issues, maybe not in the sequence that would be there in my mind, but they definitely do. And so to look at it, first of all, is there a need for the revenue budget from which salaries and pensions of the Indian Armed Forces are paid to be reduced so that you have a greater amount of money that is available for capital expenditure? Because newer weapon systems, new technologies, they cost a lot of money. And even if we are going in for a very large push for indigenous development under the Atmanirbharta scheme, the fact of the matter is that research and development, even if it is within the country, it needs capital, should I say, commitment from the armed forces. And therefore, you need to reduce revenue because the overall availability of monies for defense is limited. Right. So, yes, definitely there is a need to reduce the revenue expenditure. And one of the major chunks goes into salaries as well as pensions. And pensions have been burgeoning over the years as the, should I say, the amount that is being paid under different pay commissions has increased. So that is a very valid point that you raised, that we need to reduce it. And I think the tour of duty, what it is supposed to do, and like you said, it's only what we've heard in the media so far, but there seem to be certain concrete steps that the government and the armed forces are considering. And the tour of duty is to reduce the burden of salaries and subsequent pensions and have young blood available when it is needed in the armed forces. So I think the concept as it is in the right direction, but it is in the finer details of how it is to be firstly put into policy, and second, how it is going to get implemented and what are the cascading effects that it has, because it is not purely a financial issue. It also has operational and it has administrative fallouts for the armed forces in the short, medium, as well as the long term. So I think that's something we could focus on.
Okay, so you're saying that, of course, the idea of at some level reducing the cost and, of course, high salaries, high pension, almost 40% of our defense budget annually actually goes just in this, and then the rest of the 60% in all other uses. So obviously there is a high component there that needs to be looked at and gradually reduced. But there will be many other aspects that have to be kept in mind, many pitfalls that we must watch out for. And I will ask you about that in just a bit. But let me try and understand why we may be looking at it now and moving faster at towards bringing some kind of policy. And this is information that the Indian Army and the Indian government have put out in the last few months. In December, we got some data from the Defense Ministry. In March as well, the Defense Minister presented some more information about this in the Parliament itself, and largely it is to help us understand what the government calls the impact of the pandemic. In the last 2 years, for our viewers to understand, in the last 2 years, there has absolutely not been any kind of recruitment in the Indian Army. If you look at 2020-21, they had actually planned about 97 recruitment rallies across the country. Only 47 of them were held. But then after these rallies comes the next step, which is the common entrance test. Only 4 of those were held. So this step, which is very important for the final induction into the force, didn't really take place, got hit by the pandemic, says the government. Last year, everything was completely suspended then. So 4 out of the 87 planned recruitment rallies took place. But since there was no entrance test that was held, there was absolutely no recruitment that took place. Now, what this has done is that this has led to a massive shortage of soldiers, or at least there are large number of vacancies which are now there in the Indian Army at the soldier, at the Jawan level, of over 1 lakh Jawans that the Indian Army now needs. Could this be one of the reasons, General Dhanoa, that the government may look at fast-tracking tour of duty as a policy?
No, I don't think the two are connected. See, the government has said that because of the COVID pandemic, these rallies, large gatherings, they could not be held, and therefore currently, from the figures that I have picked out from the press itself, there is an overall shortage of over 100,000 soldiers in all different levels within the Indian Army itself, and I'm sure the Air Force and Navy would also have corresponding shortages. But just because the pandemic has delayed your induction doesn't mean that you start pushing for going in for shorter periods of induction into the Army. That if there is a policy to be put into place, it will roll out, and I think if it has to roll out, it will roll out as a test bed case, and therefore regular recruitment to make up for the shortfall, that has to be said. That has to be done. However, having said that, the question is that this kind of a shortage within the armed forces, because 60 to 80,000 people get recruited each year into the Army, and a similar number that move out, or maybe about 40 to 50,000 retire each year. So there is going to be a shortage, even if we get back to regular recruiting, which is going to be in the Army for a while. See, the question is that in any major democracy, or even any major country which has threats on its borders, the government should be able to put out what I would call a white paper, or put out a national security policy that clearly states as to what your threats are, and define for the armed forces what exactly they are expected to do. We have it in our country in some form or the other, but it's not very explicit. So it is from there that you then decide as to what is going to be the structuring and the overall force construct of your military. So we've got a large military, 1.4 million. I think it is the 3rd or the 4th largest in the world. In the current day and age, where the kind of wars that we are seeing, and although we are seeing a return to some kind of brutal attrition in the current war in Ukraine, but the fact of the matter is that newer technologies and the new ways of fighting future wars, they require, I would say, a more skilled and a more technologically savvy army, and maybe lesser numbers. That's a given. So if lesser numbers are what you need, then you need to be able to decide as to from where are the overall size and strength of the army going to be reduced, what is going to be the shape of the future military. These are issues that need wide-ranging debate. It cannot simply be that you unraveled one thread and said, okay, we will have cost savings if we have soldiers in the army for a shorter period of time. Fine. You will barely be paying them for 3 or maybe 5 years, and then some fixed stipend and some benefits to them, and after that they're out on the streets. That's not the way you go about doing future force structuring. So we have to have a definition of what are the operational goals that an Indian military is supposed to be able to achieve, with what kind of weapon systems is it supposed to going to do that, and finally as to what is going to be the manpower structure of this military. If you're able to get these 3 things sorted out, then how are you going to recruit? What are going to be the terms and conditions of service? Do they need to change for the overall, recruiting in the armed forces? These are issues that we need to look at, and I don't know whether the tour of duty is focusing on all of this, or it's simply a short-term, should I say, a band-aid policy to say that we will recruit people for shorter periods, and therefore we'll be able to bring down our overall revenue expenditure. So I don't know which way the government is thinking, but these are my views.
So let's try and understand which way what is it that the government is thinking, and we're running that information on the screens for our viewers also. Now this is largely a collation of commentary that has come from the topmost leadership in the country. A lot of these comments actually made by Prime Minister Modi himself over the past 6 to 7 years. So the government clearly seems to be of the view that full-scale wars will be rare as we go forward, which obviously we are seeing apart from, of course, the Ukraine example, and that conflicts may become shorter. They also seem to be of the view that the character of warfare itself is evolving, where it's a lot more about the newer technology, the economies, the evolving economies themselves, and so the way we knew warfare and the style of it may actually also gradually change over the next couple of decades, and that we need to focus more on using technology to save lives, to protecting lives, rather than any other method that we may have deployed so far. And that we need to optimize, and this is a comment that Prime Minister Modi made some time back, that we need to optimize the personnel planning in military as well. So in a sense also, General Dhanoa, what you were just speaking, if that is largely the view even within the government, that they need to streamline the number of people in our armed forces and figure out where what has to be used, how would you say we should proceed towards that, and would tour of duty or short-term inductions be any part of it?
See, if you look at some of the points which you just showed, first off, no military ever goes by the premise that wars are rare and wars will not happen. Had that been the case, the Ukrainians would have been run over if they had had a similar thought process. So at no point of time should a military ever think that war cannot occur. The military prepares for war so that there can be peace. That having been said, like I said, that the government should be able to define. We've got two inimical neighbors on our borders. There are other threats that crop up. There are challenges of suddenly evacuating large numbers of Indian diaspora from different parts of the world. These require a certain amount of capabilities. And they also are standing threats that we have on our borders. So do we have a white paper? Do we have a national security policy? That's from where everything starts. Once you've defined as to what your threats are, even if it is to a limited audience, it is from there that you say that for the next 20 years, for the next 2 decades, what is going to be the size and shape of our military? Then you have to see what do we have currently and how do we transform it into what it is going to be. And that is where manpower planning and also your induction of weapons and technologies, your budgeting, it is all something which has to be futuristic. And you cannot simply fit in the tour of duty into this. Yes, it can be a component. But remember, if you want technology to be inducted into the military, you need people who are better trained. So if you need people who are better trained, their training, the length of training will be longer. Then they must be able to optimize and be able to give their due back to the government for having trained them. Will a 3 years or a 5 years policy allow you to do that? And after all, when you're training a soldier, there's a certain amount of effort that goes in. And learning in the military is a lifelong process. It's not something which stops after 1 year and after that a man is fully trained. He gets to do his training on the job, and he does it at different ranks. And therefore, when you say that 50% of the army will finally only be up to 5 years, then what is the level of training that you will have? And each time, who is going to take the burden on for training the newer people who come in? Because after all, they have to fit into a system of regimentation that we have, a system of training on the jobs, upskilling of their understanding of the newer technology, which changes every 3 to 5 years. So how are you going to be able to do all that? These are issues that just cannot be brushed under the carpet.
In fact, I was speaking to someone who also said that when it comes to combat, teamwork and camaraderie between the team itself also plays a large part, even if you are deployed at the front line, and somebody who's only going to be there for a couple of years, 10 months to 1 year of training, and then gets deployed, goes on annual leave also in between that or some kind of leave, how much of that camaraderie are they going to develop? But since you made the point about training, General Dhanoa, let me ask you to explain to our viewers as well what goes into a training, at what level At what level can we say that a soldier is now ready to use a certain kind of a gun or a certain kind of a tank or participate in any kind of warfare?
Okay, so currently, once you get recruited, you are sent to your various regimental training centers, be it in the infantry, be it in the armored corps, be it in the artillery, or even the other support services. And what happens is that you are broken into as a basic soldier in the initial period of anything between, I would say, 15 to 20 weeks. After that, you start getting a little bit of extra skills which are given to you. And the minimum time I would say that it takes for a soldier to say that he's finished his training and is now a trained recruit could be anything from 10 months to 1 year. And for some of the specific combat arms, it takes another 6 to 8 months. So almost 1.5 years before he is inducted into a regular fighting unit. So when he comes in as a recruit, he's already spent, let's say the minimum time he spent is 10 months in training. I think 44 weeks is the minimum specified. And it is only after this that he comes into a unit and he's treated as an untrained raw recruit by the units. It's over here over the next minimum, I would say, depending on the level of complexity of the equipment, the kind of place where he is being inducted into. Is it a field area? Is it active operational areas? They will get exposed to the nature of their work for anything up to 2 years to 3 years. So really speaking, what we are talking about, the tour of duty, the length, by the time you actually have the confidence in an individual that he'll be able to do his duty, he'll be looking for exits. And therefore, who's going to then put so much of effort into training him to then only leave at the end of that specified period when you have that comfort level that he's fitting into a combat unit, he'll be able to undertake subunit tasks. He has a certain amount of understanding with the other soldiers who are there in his small section or in his platoon. You just cannot say that within 3 years he would have done his bit, done his training, understood the nature of his duty, and also maybe in some places been, having seen actual combat. It won't happen that way. Minimum time that you need, okay, fine. If you are looking to induct soldiers for shorter durations, my sense is that the minimum time you will need to keep them in the army is for anything between 7 to 10 years. Currently, 15 years is the minimum color service, extendable by 2 years. So 15 to 17 years, I think it can get reduced to 7 to 10 years. But if you're looking at these very short term, 3 to 5 years, it's not going to be practical and workable for the units on the ground. It'll get imposed from the top, that's fine. But the people who will suffer is the people who are at the lower level, who are at the ground level doing the actual work. And it is over there that the overall effectiveness of the system is going to get tested. And I am afraid that if you're going to keep it so short, then definitely it's not going to be optimal and it's not going to be bang for your buck, if I may say so.
Okay, thank you so much for your insights, for sharing your expert view on this interesting issue. And I want to just highlight once again that right now what we're discussing has still not been given a final shape by the government. So we don't know how it will finally turn out. We are having this conversation on the larger idea of a tour of duty, which means that any Indian who qualifies with a basic eligibility can be in the Indian Army for a period of 3 to 5 years. Like I said, over the years, several thoughts within the government have also changed. Earlier, they were also looking at officers. Maybe at some point they will. Right now, they are only considering this for soldiers for a period of 3 to 5 years. What the government may want to achieve from this is, one, to immediately bring in fresh blood into the Indian Army. For the last 2 years, we've not seen any recruitments at all, and at this pace, it will become a huge problem. Like General Dhanoa was pointing out, even if you step up on your recruitment now, it will take us several years before we're able to actually fix that shortfall that we're looking at right now. The other aspect, of course, yes, the intent to bring down your costs may be something that needs to be looked at when it comes to your high salaries and your pension, the overall high cost, not salary as a high number for an individual, but the overall 40% of your budget going into this. Maybe the government does want to look at reducing that and should be looking at reducing that, but whether this is the right solution to get there or not, that has become a matter of debate. Many believe that you need a more comprehensive picture, as you just heard from our expert as well, as what is your vision, what is your strategy in terms of the overall structure for the army, for induction, for training, and for the period of service that you would want. And then you look at really refining the entire policy. Even if you're looking at short-term inductions, they need to be at least of a period of 7 to 10 years. That was General Dhanoa's view that he presented to us, that 3 to 5 years is a very short period of time for it to benefit either the army or even the individual who gets inducted for that period of time. We will wait and watch to see what the government finally decides, and of course then we will come back to you with lots more insights. For now, a big thank you, and it's a wrap from me, Tanvi Shukla, here on Simplified. Thank you.